Most nights, I end up working late, and my office is a good 45 minutes from home. But no matter how tired I am or how busy things get, I've always had a soft spot for animals. When I'm on the road, I keep an eye out for strays or animals in need, and I can't tell you how many times I've pulled over to help. So, when I tell you what happened that night, just know it was second nature for me to stop. I was coming home from a client dinner later than expected. The highway stretched ahead of me, dark and deserted. Just me, the hum of my engine, and a few late-night radio tunes to keep me company. I spotted something odd up ahead, a small shape just off the road. I eased up on the gas, squinting as my headlights illuminated the shape. There, tied to a post, was a small, scruffy-looking dog, its fur damp and matted, just sitting there as if it had given up. My heart clenched. What kind of person would leave a dog like that, tied up and abandoned on a dark stretch of highway? Before I knew it, I had already pulled over. I grabbed the leash I always keep in my trunk, something I'd gotten into the habit of carrying over the years of picking up strays. The dog didn't move as I got out, just sat there with its head hanging low. It was a tiny thing, barely bigger than a rabbit, and it seemed exhausted, too tired even to bark. I approached slowly, whispering softly, "Hey there, little guy, it's okay, I'm here to help." I could see its eyes, dark and round, glistening under my headlights as it looked up at me, and I felt a pang of sadness. But as I took a few more steps, I noticed something in my peripheral vision. I turned my head slightly and saw two figures standing near the tree line, their faces hidden by darkness. My initial thought was that they were just other travelers, maybe even the ones who had abandoned the dog. Perhaps they'd seen my car pull over and came to check. But something about their posture, a quiet, unblinking stillness, set off an alarm in my head. They weren't moving toward me, they were just watching. The dog whimpered, tugging at the rope around its neck, and I felt a sudden unease settle over me. One of the men shifted, stepping a little closer. Now I could see him more clearly, a broad-shouldered figure with his hands hanging loose at his sides. He didn't say anything, just took another step, his posture casual in a way that felt anything but friendly. The second man, smaller and thinner, stayed back in the shadows, only his silhouette visible. "Hey!" I called out, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Is this your dog?" Silence. The first man took another step forward, his eyes locked on me. A sense of dread began to settle in as I watched him, but I tried to keep my voice steady. "Look, I just wanted to help. If this is your dog, maybe we can..." The man raised his hand, cutting me off, and finally spoke. "This isn't about the dog," he said, his voice low. I saw a glint of metal in his hand. He was holding a gun. My heart hammered as he raised it toward me, a dark, detached look in his eyes. I froze, feeling the reality of the situation close in. The second man stepped out from the shadows, crossing the short distance between us in 2 quick strides, and grabbed my arm, his grip tight. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, his voice eerily calm. "We're going to drive to an ATM. You're going to take out as much cash as you can. No fuss, no calls, and you'll be fine. Don't try anything stupid." Suddenly, the rumble of an engine echoed from behind, growing louder. Headlights flooded the scene. Relief washed over me as I saw a massive semi-truck pulling onto the shoulder, screeching to a stop just a few feet behind my car. The driver's door flew open, and out stepped a tall, burly man, gun in hand, his face a mask of controlled fury. He didn't waste a second. "Drop the gun and let her go," he bellowed, his voice echoing through the quiet stretch of road. The 2 men froze, their heads snapping toward the trucker. I could feel their grip on me loosen slightly, the sudden tension almost visible in the air. The trucker took a few steps closer, his stance firm, gun aimed steadily at the men. "I'm not asking twice," he warned, his voice a low, dangerous growl. The larger of the 2 men glanced at his partner, clearly weighing his options, but the sight of the trucker's unwavering gun seemed to make up his mind. Slowly, they let go of me, their hands raised as they backed away. I stumbled toward the trucker, not daring to look back, feeling his solid presence as he shielded me. He kept his eyes locked on them, gun still raised, until they disappeared into the darkness, muttering under their breath. "Get in your car," he said firmly, never taking his gaze off where the men had vanished. "I'll follow close behind to make sure they're gone for good." I gave him a grateful nod. my hands shaking as I reached down to untie the dog. Part of me wanted to take it with me, but I knew I couldn't risk it, not with those men watching. I whispered an apology to the little terrier, feeling a pang of guilt as I left it there, but I knew I had to get out. The trucker stayed put, watching as I climbed back into my car. Once inside, I locked the doors. The truck's headlight cast a beam onto the two men who were now retreating further into the darkness, their shapes blending into the shadows. He gave me a quick nod, and I took the cue, pulling back onto the road and accelerating. As I drove away, my mind raced with what had just happened. The shock, the fear, the realization that I had almost been kidnapped. My hands were still shaking, and I couldn't shake the image of those two men standing there. I drove straight to the next town, not stopping until I reached a gas station with lights and people around. Once parked, I took a moment to catch my breath, my heart still pounding. I felt a pang of regret for the dog, the helpless look in its eyes as I'd left it behind, but I knew I'd had no choice. I called the police, giving them all the details I could remember. The dog, the two men, the location. They assured me they'd send someone out to check the area, but I knew the men would be long gone by now. They were predators, quick and cautious, and I doubted they'd stick around after being confronted by the trucker. The next day, I heard back from animal control. They'd found the dog safe and unharmed, but there was no trace of the two men. A part of me was relieved, but another part felt uneasy, knowing they were still out there, looking for their next victim. Since that night, I've changed how I approach situations on the road. I still have a soft spot for animals, and I still want to help, but I'm more cautious now. I know I can't let my compassion blind me to danger, and I'll always be grateful to that trucker who showed up just in time. Who knows what could have happened to me if he hadn't stopped to help. Being on the road alone is something I've grown used to. In my work as a lawyer, I frequently travel between cities for consultations, trials, and mediations, often late at night or early in the morning. I'm naturally skeptical, maybe even a little guarded. I think it comes with the territory. You learn to read people, to be cautious about intentions, and I thought I was pretty good at trusting my instincts. I'd been driving for a few hours already, winding through country roads that seemed to stretch on forever. It was a long, empty stretch, and I hadn't passed another car for miles. When I spotted a gas station glowing in the dark up ahead, I decided to pull over. It was a small place, just one of those gas-and-go stations where you pump first, pay at the window, and keep moving. Nothing unusual. I was a few hours from home, but the road had worn on me, and a quick stop felt like a good idea. I pulled up to one of the pumps and stepped out, stretching as I went around to grab the gas nozzle. Just as I was starting to fill up the car, I heard a voice. "Need a hand with that?" I turned to see a man, mid-40s maybe, with a baseball cap pulled low over his forehead, standing just a few feet from me. I hadn't heard him approach, which was unsettling in itself, but I kept my expression neutral and forced a polite smile. "Oh no, I'm good, thanks," I replied, trying to focus on the pump. The man didn't take the hint, though. Instead of moving on, he lingered nearby, watching as I filled up the tank. "Where are you heading? Somewhere close by?" he asked, looking at my car like he was sizing me up. I laughed a little, keeping it light. "Long drive home. Just passing through." "Long drive, huh?" He nodded, as if that somehow explained everything. "You know, you shouldn't be driving alone so late. Lots of folks out here who don't have the best intentions." I felt a flicker of unease, but I shrugged it off. People mean well sometimes, even if they don't realize they're being invasive. "I appreciate the advice," I said, focusing on the gas meter as the numbers ticked up. But he didn't stop. "I mean, think about it," he continued, stepping a little closer. "All kinds of things could happen out here. Flat tires, engine trouble. Hard to get help when you're miles from anything." His words were unsettling, almost like he was planting ideas in my head. I tried not to react, but it was hard to ignore the edge creeping into my thoughts. "Yeah, that's true," I replied, keeping my tone casual, but inwardly, I was already running through my mental checklist. Pump the gas, pay, and get back on the road. Then, out of nowhere, he asked, "Are you traveling alone?" The question felt invasive, like he was prying into something he shouldn't be asking. My guard went up immediately. Meeting my husband down the road, I lied smoothly, keeping my face neutral. He's about 10 minutes behind me. He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was thin and unconvincing, his eyes too intense as he studied me. That's smart. It's always better to have someone with you, especially out here. People don't realize how dangerous the open road can be. I just nodded, looking toward the store window, hoping someone else might appear or at least bear witness to this strange encounter. But the place was empty, and it was just the two of us under the harsh fluorescent lights. I tapped my fingers on the gas handle, waiting impatiently for it to click to signal that I could get out of this uncomfortable situation. You know, he continued, I could follow you down the road just to make sure you get there safely. You never know what might happen, and I'd hate for you to be stranded out here alone. My whole body was on edge. This wasn't a friendly stranger. He was probing, looking for vulnerabilities. I gave him a tight smile and shook my head. That's really not necessary. Like I said, my husband's right behind me. He'll be here any minute. The gas pump finally clicked, and I replaced the nozzle, grateful for the excuse to get back in my car. But as I was about to turn, he took a step closer. Really, it's no trouble. I insist. Something in his tone changed, an edge that wasn't there before. I held his gaze for a moment, willing myself to stay calm, but the unease was turning into something sharper, more pressing. Thanks, I replied, keeping my voice steady, but I'll be just fine. I reached for the car door, feeling his eyes on me the whole time, and slid into the driver's seat. I locked the doors immediately and started the engine, pretending not to notice him still standing by the pump, watching me intently. As I pulled out of the gas station, I couldn't resist a quick look in the rearview mirror. Sure enough, he was still there, watching as I drove away. I thought that was the end of it, but a few miles down the road, headlights appeared in my mirror. It was him. I knew it the second I saw those headlights. He followed close, almost mimicking the way a friend might drive if they were keeping you in sight. But this wasn't a friend, and he was too close for comfort, his headlights glaring in my mirror. I could feel the tension tightening in my chest, my mind racing with possibilities. Why was he following me? Was he planning to run me off the road? Would he follow me all the way home? My first thought was to call someone, anyone, but my phone was low on battery, and the last thing I wanted was for it to die in the middle of this. I had to lose him. I scanned the road ahead, looking for an exit or a way to lose him in traffic. A sign for an upcoming town appeared, and I made a sudden decision. I turned abruptly onto a side road that led into the town center. For a moment, I thought I'd lost him, but then I saw those headlights reappear, following me turn for turn. I tried to keep calm, driving through the small, quiet streets, hoping to find a police station or a crowded area. I finally spotted a small coffee shop still open, and I pulled into the parking lot, hoping he'd pass by. But instead, he pulled in right behind me, parking a few spaces away. I felt a surge of panic. I quickly exited the car and walked into the coffee shop, pretending like I knew exactly where I was going. Inside, I found the barista, a young guy who looked a little startled as I approached. "Hi," I said. "Can you call the police? There's someone following me, and I don't feel safe." He looked outside, catching sight of the man in the parking lot, and nodded, reaching for the phone. I felt a wave of relief, but it was short-lived. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw the man step out of his car, watching the shop intently, as if deciding what to do next. The barista spoke quickly on the phone, describing the situation, and within a few minutes, a police car pulled into the lot. I watched as the officers approached the man, questioning him as he tried to explain himself away. After a few tense minutes, one of the officers came inside to speak with me. "He claims he was just trying to make sure you were safe," the officer said, his expression skeptical. "But based on your report, we'll make sure he doesn't follow you any further." I thanked him, grateful for the help, and watched as they escorted the man back to his car. I stayed in the coffee shop for a while longer, waiting until I was sure he was gone. I'd always thought I was good at reading people, but this encounter reminded me that danger can hide behind a smile, and that sometimes the most unsettling threats are the ones that come disguised as kindness. Traveling alone comes with the job when you're a journalist. You get used to late nights on the road, remote destinations, and a steady diet of gas station coffee and fast food. And after years of hopping from one location to the next, I'd say I was pretty comfortable being out there on my own. I knew how to read a map, plan routes, and keep my wits about me. But there are some things you can't really prepare for, no matter how well-traveled you are. I was driving back from a small-town interview on a stretch of highway, nothing but fields and mountains for miles. I'd been covering a series of features on remote towns and the people who lived there. After a long day of interviews, all I wanted was to get to my hotel, take a shower, and crash. The highway was practically deserted, which was typical for that time of night, so I turned up my music, settled back in my seat, and focused on the road ahead. The first time I noticed the semi-truck was when I looked in my rearview mirror and saw those massive headlights glaring back at me. They were so bright that for a second, I thought maybe I'd missed a car merging behind me. I adjusted my mirrors and slowed down a bit, expecting the truck to pass. But it didn't. Instead, it matched my speed, staying just a few feet behind. I checked my speedometer. I was going just above the speed limit, enough that any driver in a hurry would be impatient enough to pass. But this truck stayed close, so close that its lights filled my entire rearview mirror, washing everything in harsh white light. I tried not to think much of it at first. Maybe the driver didn't see me, maybe he was new to the route and was driving a bit more cautiously. I sped up a little, putting more distance between us, and for a moment it seemed like that was the end of it. But as soon as I settled back into my lane, I noticed the truck speeding up, closing the gap between us again. This time, it was even closer than before. The headlights were practically blinding, making it hard to see anything in my mirrors. I could feel the pressure mounting, my hands gripping the wheel a little tighter as I tried to shake the uneasy feeling creeping up on me. I took a deep breath, reminding myself to stay calm. Maybe the driver was just impatient. Maybe he'd pass on one of the straight stretches up ahead. But that wasn't what happened. Instead, he kept that close distance, riding my bumper. I slowed down again, tapping the brakes lightly, hoping he'd take the hint and back off. But the truck stayed put, its headlights unwavering. I felt boxed in by the darkness and those blinding lights that filled every mirror. My heart started to race, a cold sweat prickling at the back of my neck. I decided to try speeding up, hoping that putting more distance between us might give me some breathing room. I pushed the pedal down, watching the speedometer climb as I pulled away from the truck. For a few seconds, I thought I'd finally lost him. But then, the truck's engine roared and it surged forward, closing the gap with a relentless determination. Something told me this wasn't just about being in a hurry. It felt intentional, like the driver was doing this on purpose, trying to intimidate me. And it was working. I mean, it's quite intimidating to have a truck that size stuck to your bumper in the middle of the night, any sudden movement, and it could run over me without even feeling it. I was as nervous as I could get. Every time I sped up, he'd speed up. When I slowed down, he'd slow down. It was like he was playing a twisted game, and I was stuck as the unwilling participant. I scanned the road ahead, looking for an exit, a gas station, anything that might offer some kind of escape. But there was nothing but empty highway stretching out in front of me, mile after mile of nothingness. The isolation made it worse. I had no idea how far the next town was or how long I'd be stuck in this nightmare. Finally, I spotted a small exit sign up ahead, a little country road that branched off to the right. I didn't even think twice. I took the exit, hoping he'd just keep going straight. As I turned off, I kept an eye on my mirrors, watching to see what the truck would do. For a moment, it looked like he was going to follow, his headlights hovering at the edge of the exit ramp. But then, at the last second, he swerved back onto the highway, roaring past in a blur of lights and metal. I pulled over to the side of the road, my hands shaking as I finally let out the breath I'd been holding. The only sound was my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. I watched the truck's taillights disappear down the highway, fading into the darkness until they were gone. I sat there for a while, staring at the empty road, trying to make sense of what just happened. I'd been on plenty of late-night drives, but I'd never felt that kind of fear, that sense of being hunted. It was like the driver had zeroed in on me, intent on making my drive as terrifying as possible. Once I'd calmed down a bit, I pulled out my phone and looked up the nearest police station. I knew it might sound ridiculous, but something about that encounter had been too intense to ignore. I needed to report it, even if they thought I was overreacting. When I got to the police station, I recounted the whole story to the officer on duty, from the moment I'd noticed the truck to the terrifying game of cat and mouse on the highway. He listened patiently, nodding as I explained how the truck had followed my every move, mirroring my speed and refusing to back off. I could tell he was taking me seriously, which was a relief. The officer promised they'd look into it and said they'd try to track down the truck based on the description I'd given. A few days later, I received a call from the police department. They'd found the truck and its driver. Apparently, he'd been under the influence of drugs. His erratic behavior likely a result of a combination of exhaustion and whatever substances he'd been using. He hadn't been trying to scare me, at least not intentionally, but knowing that didn't make it any less horrifying. It only underscored the danger of being out there, alone on the road, at the mercy of a stranger's unpredictable behavior. After that, I started doing whatever I can to be safer when I'm alone. I make sure to plan my route carefully, keep my phone fully charged, and avoid driving late at night whenever I can. And every time I see a pair of headlights in my rearview mirror, I can't help but remember that semi-truck and the relentless, terrifying pursuit on that empty highway. Now, even as someone who's used to traveling alone, I don't take chances anymore. It's a sobering reminder that while the road may seem empty, you're never truly alone out there, and sometimes the company you find is the last thing you'd want. I'm a paramedic, so helping people comes naturally to me. I'm trained to run toward the trouble, even if it's not always the safest option. Most days, I'm good at separating the job from my own life. But then there are times when that instinct to help can lead you right into something you weren't prepared for. And that's exactly what happened on one highway a few months back. I was on my way back from visiting my parents a couple of towns away. This wasn't a heavily traveled road, especially at night, and I'd only passed a couple of cars in the last hour. The night was calm, the kind where the hum of your own car feels like the loudest sound for miles around. It was nice. Peaceful, even. But then, as I rounded a bend, I noticed something up ahead that caught my attention right away. There was a car parked off to the side with its hood up, and as my headlights caught the scene, I saw a figure lying just a few feet away on the road. They were lying completely still, face down, right there in the glow of my headlights. I've already dealt with everything from minor scrapes to full-on highway disasters, so my first thought was to pull over and check if the person was okay. But then, as I slowed down, something kept pulling at my mind, a gut feeling that things weren't quite right. First off, there were no skid marks on the road. I know that's a small detail, but if the car had come to a sudden stop, you'd usually see at least a faint trace of rubber burned into the asphalt. And then there was the car itself. It was just too perfect. The way it was positioned, almost angled, but not quite blocking the road, like it was set there deliberately. I took my foot off the gas, considering my options. Every fiber of my training told me to get out and check on the person, but something in my gut told me to keep driving. And yet, despite my instincts, I pulled over. I couldn't just leave them lying there. Even if it was risky, I was a paramedic, and if there was even a small chance someone needed help, I knew I had to check. I got out, but I kept my headlights on and my door open just in case. I walked toward the car, trying to stay alert to everything around me. The air was still, and all I could hear was the low hum of my car's engine. As I got closer, the scene became clearer under the headlights. The person on the ground wasn't moving at all. Lying face down, arms sprawled awkwardly, like they'd been knocked out cold. I called out, "Hey, are you okay?" No response. I took another step, but that nagging feeling in my stomach grew stronger. I looked at the car again, trying to take it all in. The hood was up, but there was no smoke or steam coming from it. Usually, if a car had broken down recently, you'd see at least a bit of residual heat. But this car looked like it had been sitting there, untouched. And then I noticed a slight blur of movement, just off to the side, a shadow in the dark just beyond the reach of my headlights. My instincts kicked in, and I froze, listening. Footsteps. They were coming from my right, close to where the roadside brush thickened. Before I could react, I heard more footsteps, this time from my left. I didn't need to look to know I was surrounded. In that moment, I realized I'd walked right into a trap. All right, stay calm, I thought, backing up slowly, trying to put some distance between myself and the figure on the ground. But before I could make it back to my car, 3 men stepped out from the shadows, surrounding me. They each had something in their hands, pipes maybe, or crowbars. It was hard to tell in the dim light, but either way, I knew they meant business. One of them, the tallest of the 3, stepped forward with a smirk. Wallet, keys, anything you got on you. My heart was pounding, but I knew better than to argue. I slowly reached into my pocket, pulling out my wallet and tossing it to him. They wanted my keys too, and while it stung to hand over my car, I wasn't about to risk my life over it. One of the guys got in my car and revved the engine, clearly ready to leave with my ride and my money. And then, just when I thought I was out of luck, the guy in the driver's seat noticed my phone. He looked at it, then looked at me and tossed it onto the pavement with a twisted grin. "Wouldn't want you stranded out here now, would we?" he said mockingly. I took a step back as they sped off, headlights disappearing down the road. There I was, stranded in the middle of nowhere, with only my phone, no wallet, no car, and the realization that I'd walked straight into a potentially deadly situation. I was angry at myself for stopping, for letting my training override my instincts, but I was also grateful that for whatever reason they'd left me with my phone. It took me a few minutes to pull myself together enough to call the police. They arrived quickly, considering how remote the area was, and took my statement. One of the officers told me that they'd received a few reports about similar incidents in the area lately. Turns out, this wasn't just a random attack. It was part of a string of robberies where the criminals preyed on people's compassion, staging fake accidents to lure them in. The police offered me a ride home, but the entire drive back, my mind was replaying everything that had happened. I kept thinking about those subtle clues, the ones that should have tipped me off, the lack of skid marks, the stillness of the car, the eerie quiet. In my line of work, you see so many genuine accidents that sometimes you forget to watch out for the fakes. In the end, I was shaken but unharmed. My car was eventually found abandoned a few miles down the road, stripped of anything valuable. I got my car back, and the police assured me they were stepping up patrols to catch the group responsible, but that experience has stayed with me. Now, every time I see a car pulled over on the side of the road, I find myself hesitating, questioning my instincts. I've always believed in helping people, that it's my duty as a paramedic to assist anyone in need. But that night taught me a tough lesson, that not everyone has good intentions, and sometimes the best thing you can do is listen to that little voice inside that says, something's not right. If these highway horror stories made you double-check your rearview mirror, hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life scares. Which story gave you the biggest chills? Drop it in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And hey, share this video with a friend who loves the thrill of the open road. They might think twice next time. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next nightmare.